Either serve my husband or get out of this house. The words hit harder than any slap. My daughter's voice echoed through the living room I had built with my own hands 40 years ago. And in that moment, something inside me settled. Then I turned to the coat rack, took my jacket, and walked out. That was the moment everything changed. Betrayal must be paid for. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The knob felt warm from the afternoon. I could hear the television murmuring behind Ryan, one of those games where the crowd roars even when nothing important happens. My chest was quiet. My hands did not shake. The porch boards that I had sanded with Laura creaked under my weight. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint sweetness of that lemonade inside. I stood there a breath longer than necessary, as if the house were asking whether I was truly leaving. I answered by pulling the door until the latch caught. The click sounded like a wedding bell played backward. On the porch, the light softened. The maple tree threw a shifting pattern over the steps. I had stained those steps the summer Emily turned 12. She had pressed her palm into the wet stain and run off laughing. I could see the faint, darker oval even now. Memory is a careful thief. It steals enough to make you ache and leaves just enough to keep you walking. Emily called after me from inside. "Dad, wait. We can talk." I turned and spoke through the screen. Talking is not what you want. You want obedience. She frowned in that way children do when they forget they are grown. It is just easier if you help him. Easier for who? For all of us. I gave her a small nod that was not an agreement. Then I went down the steps and crossed the yard to the pickup that had outlived 3 winters more than anyone expected. The seat held an old sweater of Laura's and a roll of blue tape from the last time I fixed the porch light. I slid the key in. The engine caught on the second try. At the end of the street, the stop sign shimmered in the heat. I looked in the rear view. Ryan had come to the door with the beer. He raised it as if to toast. People who mistake generosity for weakness often think they have won long before the game has started. I turned left. The old neighborhood fell away, and the highway opened in front of me, 2 lanes and a ribbon of sky that looked endless in the warm haze. I did not have a bag. I had my wallet, my keys, and the leather pocket where I keep a photograph of Laura. In the picture, she is at the lake with a scarf around her head. She is smiling a small private smile because Emily is behind me making faces to try to make her laugh. Laura was never loud. Even when she was sick, she kept her steadiness. She would touch my wrist and say, "Walter, keep the books straight." It was a joke about the bank. It was also an instruction for living. The miles slid by. I passed the diner where we used to split a slice of apple pie on Thursdays. I passed the hardware store where I still get waved at by name, though I have not bought anything useful in months. When I reached the edge of town, I turned into a small gravel lot. The sign above the office said Silver Pines Inn. Some of the letters had peeled and flaked, but the pines themselves were real and they shaded the line of rooms from the western sun. I did not go inside. Not yet. I sat in the truck and breathed. You do not leave a place like that because of one sentence. You leave because you have heard versions of it in softer clothes for years. The request sounds like a kindness, the favor that becomes a duty, the duty that turns into law. A man can forgive 1,000 small cuts as long as he believes they come from clumsy hands. When he finally sees the blade, he understands every cut was intended. A car pulled into the lot 2 spaces over. A couple in their 70s stepped out. He steadied her by the elbow while she lifted a suitcase from the trunk. The way he touched her was a habit, not a display. I felt something move under my ribs. Not pain, a kind of empty attention. I turned off the engine and carried Laura's sweater with me as I walked to the office. The woman behind the desk had hair the color of copper pennies and a crossword resting open beside the register. "Room for one night?" she asked without looking up. "For now," I said. "Name, Walter Grayson." She wrote it slowly. She slid a key across the counter and nodded toward the row of doors. 12, faces the pines. The room smelled of old coffee and a window that had not been opened in weeks. The bedspread had a pattern of small blue leaves. I set Laura's sweater across the back of the chair. I stood there a moment and listened. I could hear a shower running in a nearby room. I could hear the soft, mechanical breath of the air unit. I could hear nothing from my phone because I had turned off the sound before I left the driveway. I washed my hands and watched the water darken and then run clear. When I looked up, the mirror showed a man with a calm mouth and a tired kindness around the eyes. I thought of Emily at age 8 lining up toy horses on the floor of my office at the bank. She would name each one after a customer. She would tell me who paid on time. Trust is a ledger you keep even when the drawer is closed. I had kept it faithfully. I had also let people write in it without earning the ink. The phone vibrated across the nightstand. Emily again. Then a message from an unknown number. I did not answer. My silence was not a punishment. It was a boundary I could finally recognize. I sat at the desk and opened the drawer. There was a pad of paper with the inn's name at the top. The pen was cheap and wrote too thickly. I made it write thinner by bending the tip. Then I drew a line in the middle of the page and wrote 2 words at the top of each column. Given, taken. I did not list dollars, not yet. I listed moments. The night I drove across town with a space heater because their furnace had died. The morning I stood at the insurance office and added 2 cars to my policy because they could not afford their own. The afternoon I watched Ryan hook a trailer to my truck and use it all weekend without asking how the truck would be filled with gas. For the other column, I wrote smaller things. The Sunday when Emily forgot my birthday. The Tuesday when she laughed at a joke about old men needing supervision. The way Ryan wiped his hands on my kitchen towel like I worked there. The pad filled faster than I expected. I tore the page and folded it into the pocket where I keep Laura's photo. I touched the fold as if to seal it. The air unit clicked louder, then settled to a low, steady sound. Outside, the pines hissed and hushed. My breathing matched theirs. A knock came at the door. 3 short raps, not loud. I hesitated, then looked through the peephole. A kid in a red delivery cap held a paper bag. Wrong door, I said through the wood. He checked his receipt. Grayson Wright, room 12. I opened the door a hand's width. I did not order anything. The lady at the front said this was prepaid. Turkey Club and coffee. He lifted the bag as proof. By who? He shrugged. I took the bag and handed him a few dollars, and he jogged back to his car. The coffee smelled better than the room. I poured it into the small mug by the sink and sat again. I did not know who had sent it. For a moment, I imagined Emily a white flag disguised as lunch. Then I noticed the napkin under the sandwich. A single line written in blue ink. Old men who count first usually win last. No signature. The handwriting was familiar. Frank from the bank uses that blocky print that looks like it learned to speak with numbers before letters. I could see him shaking his head over the way I had let things go. The note made me smile. For the first time that day, I felt something close to hunger. I ate slowly. The first bite steadied me. Food does that when your stomach has been standing at attention for too long. I poured the rest of the coffee into the mug and took it to the open door. The evening had cooled. The pines were darker now. A line of birds crossed the sky toward the river. Somewhere a child laughed, which is the purest sound on earth and the most complicated when you have lost one kind of family and have not found another yet. My phone vibrated again and again. I set it on the windowsill where it could hum to itself without touching me. The motel sign flickered and steadied. A couple 2 doors down were arguing softly about a missed turn earlier in the day. Even their anger had tenderness inside it. I thought of Laura again. She would have told me to rest and then plan. She would have told me not to argue truth with people who prefer comfort to honesty. I went back to the desk and took a second sheet of paper. I wrote another pair of words. What next? Then I wrote just 1 sentence beneath. Do nothing tonight. It was not a resignation. It was a decision shaped like patience. I let the quiet lengthen until it became a chair I could sit in. I placed the phone face down. I watched the last light leave the sky. A while later there came another knock. This one is softer. I looked through the peephole and saw no one. Only the corridor and the glow from the sign. I opened the door and found a small envelope on the mat. My name is written in that same blocky print. Inside was a photocopy of a page. It looked like a form. I did not study it, not yet. I knew what it would be. In my line of work, I had seen more forms than birthdays. I slid the paper back into the envelope and set it under the ledger page with given and taken. The two belonged together, even if I did not read the details tonight. I turned off the light and lay on the bed. The ceiling had a small crack shaped like a river. I followed it with my eyes until breathing and thought found the same pace. My last image before sleep was simple. The glass of lemonade is on my coffee table at home. The drop is moving over my signature. The slow erasure. In my mind, I let that drop keep traveling until it slid off the paper and hit the floor and vanished. Then I pictured the deed drying clean in the air. Somewhere after midnight, the phone must have stopped buzzing. When I woke, the room held the soft gray of early morning. The first bird called from the trees. I rose and folded Laura's sweater and placed it back on the chair. I stood at the window and watched steam curl from the cup I had left on the sill. The motel looked the same as last night. I did not. My breath felt level. My hands were steady. The quiet inside me had changed shape. It was no longer the quiet of being dismissed. It was the quiet of a man walking toward his own plan. I dressed and laced my shoes. I slipped the envelope and the ledger page into my pocket. I took one last look at the empty bed and the thin blue leaves on the spread. Then I opened the door to the trees and the new light and the gravel that would crunch under my steps. Behind me, the room exhaled. Ahead of me, the day waited for a man who had finally listened. I used to think generosity could build loyalty. Turns out, it only built expectations. The morning after I left the motel, air tasted like old coffee and rain. The window glass held a film of dust that turned the light the color of skim milk. I sat at the little desk with Laura's sweater folded beside me and tried to listen to nothing. Silence never stays pure for long. It fills with memory. In the glove box of my truck, there is a photograph that I have avoided for months. I brought it inside and set it on the desk. The plastic sleeve had a crease across one corner as if someone had pressed too hard while trying to make time stop. It was Emily on her wedding day, mouth open in a laugh that belonged to summer eyes, bright veil lifting in a breeze that did not care about anything human. Ryan stood beside her with one hand near his tie. He looked like a man who had already decided what the room owed him. In the background, I could see the lake and the white tent and the string lights that came on as dusk approached. There was a small blur on the right edge of the frame. That blur was me. I remember the smell of the caterer's grill and the way the floor of the rented dance platform flexed under our feet. When it came time for the father and daughter dance, the band started too quickly and had to start again. Emily laughed and made a face at me. She whispered that I was her safe place. I told her none of this mattered as much as the life after the photographs. She said that was why she wanted the photographs to be perfect. I kept my mouth shut. Sometimes peace looks like agreement. Sometimes it is just a debt paid in advance. My mind drifted further back than the white tent. It went to a living room with a fan that clicked every third turn. Laura and I were younger then, sitting on the floor among college brochures spread like maps. Emily had circled a school that cost more than our house had when we bought it. Laura looked at me over the top edge of a brochure. She did not need to say anything. I told Emily we would figure it out. She hugged my neck and ran off to tell her friends. Later that night, Laura placed a hand over my ledgers and smiled the small, resigned smile of a woman who understands that love has a price and that a family will pay it together. Keep the books straight, Walter. I promised I would. I poured motel coffee into the styrofoam cup and waited for the thin steam to rise. The bed behind me looked like it had been slept in by a careful ghost. I turned the wedding photo face down and then turned it back face up. Hiding a picture does not hide a fact. The longer I looked at the image, the more I saw what it did not show. It did not show the rehearsals where Ryan always found a way to ask whether the house would ever be too much for me. He would say it lightly with that easy grin that people mistake for charm. You need space to breathe, Walt. You should travel. Maybe you could let us take care of the place while you go see the Grand Canyon. He said it enough times that the idea began to sound like something I had thought of. He never pushed harder than my politeness would allow. That is a kind of skill. It is also a kind of theft. The phone buzzed against the desk. I almost let it go, then I saw the name. Frank Holloway. When a man like me leaves his house and his daughter behind, true friends get restless, I answered. You gave them everything, Walter. What else could they want? Control? A long breath came through the line. I thought so. I need you to hear this. Months ago, he came to the branch, wanted to ask general questions. He was smiling like a man on a billboard. Said he wanted to make sure your systems would keep running smoothly while you focused on rest. He knew the dates, the digits, even the exact day your policy renews. He talked like a son, but he looked like a man counting someone else's chips. I said nothing at first. The cheap wall clock ticked like a drip somewhere else in the building. I asked him where he got the details. Frank continued. He said Emily knows everything about her father. He said that made marriage easier. I told him privacy has rules. He shrugged as if rules were furniture. I thought you should know. Thank you. There was a pause that was not silence. It was the breath of a friend who can hear a man arranging his thoughts. You are still at the Silver Pines. Yes. You need anything I need time. You have it. And Walter, yes. Next time I come by, we are going to talk about a better lock for that generosity of yours. When the call ended, the room felt smaller. I set the phone down and stared at the photograph again. It had begun to warp slightly from the humidity of the car. The faces looked softer than they had in real life. Lines blurred at the edges. Beauty can be a liar when it refuses to show the background. On the day Emily was married, I stood near the shore watching the tent breathe with the wind. Ryan walked over and clapped me on the shoulder with a familiarity that felt like a hand going into my pocket. He said I had raised a queen and that he would lift the crown whenever it got heavy. I thanked him. In the corner of my eye, I saw Laura's friend Margaret from church watching us, her mouth pulled into that little knot she gets when she senses something ugly wearing a suit. Later, when the dancing began, Ryan made a quiet announcement about how family stands together and how we stick through thick and thin. Everyone laughed at the mistake. I remember thinking that sometimes the truth arrives wearing the wrong word. I do not like the story I am telling about my daughter. I would rather tell you about the way she used to fall asleep in the back seat with a book open and a pencil still in her hand. I would rather talk about the plant she brought home in second grade that only grew when she talked to it. I would rather remember how she called me from college and told me she had walked in the first snow of the year and thought of me. But the present chooses its own guests. It invited Ryan. It invited his hunger. It invoked the cold logic that makes a man dress manipulation as love. I stood and walked to the window. The neon sign outside blinked twice and steadied, then flickered again. The hum of the old bulb filled the room with a soft threat. This is what happens to an old light. It does not go dark all at once. It pauses, it glows, it flickers, it learns how to fail gradually. I stared at the motel logo bleeding its orange into the day, and I knew that the wedding photograph was doing the same thing. It was flickering. It would not hold. A knock came at the door of the room next to mine. A child laughed, then shushed herself. A woman said, "Sorry," in a whisper that made me think of someone hiding a smile. Ordinary life kept right on. I found the pencil from last night and added a line to the paper where I had written given and taken. Under taken, I wrote one word: clarity. There are moments when losing something gives you back your eyes. When I finally turned the photograph over again, I noticed a small detail I had forgotten. On the backside in Emily's handwriting, there was a note from months after the wedding. Thanks for making everything feel like forever. Love, E. The ink had bled slightly where a drop of something had touched it. Water, maybe. Or a tear was wiped quickly before it could make trouble on the paper. I traced the smudged edge with my finger. Love sometimes is a story we keep telling while the facts move on without us. The phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. It included a picture of a document. I tapped it open and saw exactly what I expected. A copy of an inquiry form from a lender I know by reputation. The request included the name of my place and a space that described ownership. He had checked a little box that suggested a right he did not have. The date on the document was in winter. I remembered the day clearly now. There had been light snow in the morning and a short power outage at the branch that afternoon. Ryan had shown up at my kitchen table that evening with a carton of takeout and said he wanted to help with the gutters that weekend. I had thanked him. Sometimes a thief brings you dinner and uses your gratitude as the key. I put the phone face down. Telling myself this story out loud did not change any facts, but it changed something inside me. It narrowed the path. I would not bargain for a place in my own life. I would not offer explanations to a man who had studied me like a machine to be operated. A father can make himself poor and still not buy love. A father can make himself invisible and still not find peace. The only thing that works is honesty followed by distance and then by law where law is needed. Outside, the pines met the wind in a quiet conversation. I opened the door a few inches and let the smell of wet bark into the room. I thought of Pastor Lewis and the way he ends services with a line about laying down burdens you were never meant to carry. I looked down at the photograph and understood that some burdens look like gifts when you first pick them up. Then they become furniture and then they become walls. I placed the photograph back in its sleeve and set it on top of Laura's sweater. I would not throw it out. I would not worship it either. It was evidence. It belonged in the file where facts go to be useful. I wrote one more sentence on the pad. Love without boundaries is an invitation to be used. The words looked harsh and true at the same time. I closed the pad and slid it into the pocket beside the pencil. The neon flickered again, 2 short bursts and a longer one. The light shifted across the room and then stilled. In the reflection on the window, I saw a man who looked nothing like a victim and everything like a person who has chosen a quieter weapon. Patience, procedure, precision. I whispered to myself that I would take the rest of the day to remember, and then I would stop remembering and begin. Before I stepped outside, I called Frank back. He answered on the first ring. You gave them everything, Walter. What else could they want? Control? Then take it back. I smiled without showing teeth. That is the way older men smile when the decision has already been made. I tucked the photograph into the glove box again and walked toward the office to pay for another night. As I crossed the gravel, a shaft of sunlight broke through the pines and landed on the white edge of the reception counter, where a plastic frame held a picture of the owner with his wife and their 2 teenage boys, all of them squinting into a wind at a beach that could be anywhere. The frame was crooked. I straightened it without thinking. Then I pushed open the door and felt the bell above my head ring a small bell that sounded like permission. The motel smelled of old coffee and second chances. The scent lifted from the carpet as if yesterday had been brewed into the floor and left to cool. Room 12 held the vacant hum of the air vent and a soft neon buzz that slipped under the door from the sign outside. Morning light found the pines and filtered through them until the walls looked washed in a patient green. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt for my heartbeat like a man checking a well after a storm. It was steady. The hurt had not left. It had changed clothes. I stood at the small mirror above the desk and buttoned my shirt. The glass tilted slightly, which made my reflection look like a man walking uphill. That felt right. I opened the drawer and found last night's motel notepad with the list I had started. Given and taken. The paper had curled at the edges as if the words had warmed it. I slid the notepad into my pocket and closed the drawer with the same careful pressure I used to use on the bank vault door. The difference was that now I was locking something open. The office had a basket of apples near the coffee urn. I took one and nodded to the clerk with the copper hair. She asked if the room had what I needed. I told her I needed a place to write that would forgive the sound of a keyboard. She smiled and said the breakfast room was empty until noon. I carried the apple and a mug of coffee to a table near the window and watched a sliver of the highway as trucks shouldered past. The table rocked, so I folded a napkin and tucked it under a leg. Order is often nothing more than attention made visible. Across the street, a pharmacy opened its door for the day. I walked over and bought a brown leather notebook, 2 pens that promised archival ink, and a paper folder with pockets. The notebook fit my palm the way Laura's hand used to fit it. It was simple and sturdy. It said nothing about feelings. It promised columns. On the way back, a light rain began, the kind that does not convince you to run, but does convince you to keep going. Back in the breakfast room, I wrote my name on the first page and added the date and the room number. Then I drew a straight line down the center as if I were splitting a field for planting. On the left, I wrote support with a small underline. On the right, I wrote evidence. I took a slow breath and then began to write dates. The memory opens like a ledger when you ask it the right way. Rent payments were made when I had told myself it was temporary help. Insurance adjustments were made when I convinced myself it was simpler if everything was under one roof. Grocery store totals when money was tight and pride was tighter. I did not write the amounts yet. I wrote the times and the reasons and the signs that had looked harmless at the moment. When the first page was filled, I turned it and kept going. A quiet settled into me as the brown notebook gathered my years. The pen scratched a steady rhythm, and the hum of the air vent joined it until the two together sounded like a train moving out of a station with no hurry at all. I paused only to sip coffee gone lukewarm. I wrote down conversations I had ignored while they were happening. Ryan is suggesting I should travel. Ryan offered to call around about refinancing because he knew people. Ryan jokingly said in front of Emily that I would not need so many keys once the place found a younger pair of hands. I had laughed then, the kind of laugh that tries to lift a feeling and drop it somewhere nobody can see. You cannot rebuild respect but you can audit betrayal. I said it under my breath, and it felt like a form I had been waiting to sign. The notebook received the sentence without complaint. On a fresh page, I wrote a heading called Systems. I listed the places where money moved without asking me for permission. Mortgage transfers, the insurance policy with 2 extra vehicles on it. The joint card, when authorized, meant access, and access had become a habit. I did not cancel anything. Not yet. I copied hotline numbers and login addresses and noted which ones would speak to a person on a Sunday and which ones would only speak to a machine. I circled 3 items and labeled them Day 1. Preparation looks like victory to a man who is used to doing without weapons. A memory rose uninvited but not unwelcome. Emily at 11, cross-legged on the floor with a mason jar full of coins. She wanted a bicycle with white grips and a small bell shaped like a daisy. Laura had said, "Let her count it herself. She will love the bike more that way." Emily had stacked the coins in careful towers that leaned toward each other like houses in an old town, and when one tower fell, she had smiled and built it again. I wrote that down too. Under evidence, I wrote she once liked to count honestly. A ledger is not only numbers, it is also a reminder of who a person was before someone taught them a cheaper lesson. A knock sounded against the door frame to the breakfast room. The clerk leaned in and asked if I needed the printer. "We keep a small one for business travelers if you want to use it." I thanked her and said yes. She brought it out of a cupboard and set it on the table. I connected my old laptop and watched the software recognize the device like 2 strangers remembering they had met. I logged into my accounts and pulled down statements into a folder on the desktop called Paper. That word calmed me. Paper still makes the world move even when it is made out of light. I did not draw attention to any transaction. I did not press any buttons that would change a thing. I printed enough to fill the left pocket of the folder and then printed a second copy for the right. 1 copy for the story, 1 copy for the law. The rain picked up and ticked against the window in neat points. The motel sign outside lost some of its sharpness and bled orange into the wet. I arranged my growing stack into months and put a sticky note on each set. I found patterns. The 3rd week of the month is accelerating toward the end. Small amounts that predictably preceded large ones. Requests dressed as jokes. Favors wrapped in family. It was all there if a person held the pages still enough. The phone vibrated across the table. A text from Emily asked if I was safe. The words were small and direct, and for a moment they made the room tilt back into my chest. I rested a hand on the notebook and waited until my breath evened. I typed yes. Then I set the phone face down again. A second later, another message arrived from Ryan, longer and full of the kind of ease men put on when they want to sound generous. He wrote that he had overreacted and that I was welcome to come back as soon as the air had cleared. He promised we would talk like men. He promised he would get me a beer. I did not answer. The problem had never been volume. It had been owned. I needed a change of air. I carried the folder and notebook back to the room and set them on the desk with Laura's sweater folded like a witness in attendance. I lay down for a moment and stared at the ceiling crack shaped like a river and tried to remember the sound of Laura's voice when she was telling a story she loved. The river did not move. The air vent breathed. Outside, the pines drew the rain down their branches and let it go. When I rose, I emptied my pockets on the desk. Keys, wallet, the envelope from last night with the photocopied form. I slid the paper out and read every line, the date, the phrasing that suggested rights, the tiny box next to the word ownership holding a timid X. I wrote the lender's name in the notebook under evidence and underlined it once. Not angry, not shocked. There is a relief in having the photograph of a truth you already knew. I opened the laptop and created a document called Timeline. I added the dates from the notebook and then the details from the statements and then small notes about conversations. I included what Frank had told me. I added my own memory of the winter evening when the power had blipped and Ryan had shown up with takeout to talk about gutters. I wrote it clean. I kept adjectives out of it. Facts do not need to shout. They need to line up. The typing made a small, dry sound in the motel room. The sound reminded me of the old adding machine at the branch that used to chew through a spool of paper on busy Fridays. My fingers found their own pace and kept it. When I paused, I listened to the rain and noticed it had slowed and become more deliberate. The neon outside hissed once and went quiet, then returned as if even electricity needed to take a breath. A bus pulled into the lot and idled while passengers stretched their legs. A man in a ball cap lit a cigarette and watched the gray sky with the face of someone waiting for a message that might not come. I thought about messages. I thought about how many years I had let my actions carry news to other people while theirs carried rules to me. I decided that my actions would carry rules now, and the news would be theirs to read. I sharpened the plan until it fit into one page. Step 1 was to complete the audit without flinching. Step 2 was to secure my information and close the doors I had left open out of habit. Step 3 was to take the paper to people who respect paper. The brown notebook lay open to the page where those steps lived, each written in a line without decoration, each ending with a dot that felt like the soft weight of certainty. I closed the cover and held it for a moment. It felt heavier than it should. Weight is not always a burden. Sometimes it is a handle. I returned to the breakfast room to ask the clerk about a safe place to keep copies. She offered to hold an envelope in the office. We can label it lost and found if you want privacy. I thanked her and slid the extra set of statements into a large manila envelope and wrote my name small in one corner. She tucked it into a drawer that closed with a solid sound. On my way back to the room, I passed the couple from yesterday. He carried ice in a bucket, and she carried 2 cups and a book. They smiled as if they recognized a man building something nobody could see. I nodded and kept walking. Back at the desk, I opened the laptop one more time and typed the same sentence at the top of the timeline that I had spoken earlier. You cannot rebuild respect, but you can audit betrayal. The keys clicked in a steady line. When I finished, I listened. The rain answered the typing with a hush like approval against the glass. The air vent sighed and settled. The neon buzz softened until it felt like a faraway river under the night. I rested my hand on the brown leather cover and felt its grain hold under my palm. Power does not always arrive with a shout. Sometimes it arrives with paper and a pen and a man ready to put his life back in rows. I had spent a lifetime balancing other people's accounts. That morning I started balancing my own. The notebook lay open on the desk like a clean field. The pen felt honest in my hand. I read the first page of the timeline until the words stopped vibrating, and then I closed the cover as a man might close a toolbox he knows he will use all day. The breakfast room had one outlet that did not complain, so I sat near it and plugged in my laptop. The cursor blinked. Outside, drizzle thinned into the air, and the pines let go of last night's water slowly, a leaf at a time. I took a breath deep enough to level my heartbeat and opened the banking portal I had taught 100 customers to trust. The screen recognized a familiar name and asked for the second code. I typed with hands that did not hurry. A small window popped up in the corner and offered help. I did not need help. I needed confirmation. I went to the page where transfers lived and scrolled until I found the line I had allowed to run like a quiet river. I hovered, then clicked Manage. My reflection on the laptop screen looked older than the photo on my driver's license and calmer than the man who left his porch yesterday. A list of options appeared. I clicked the one that would close the spigot. The system made me pick a reason. There was no option for me to wake up. I chose another and typed personal change. When the system asked whether I wanted to continue, I looked at the pines through the window and said yes out loud. The confirmation screen loaded with a small tone that sounded like a microwave finishing tea. That single beep landed in my chest and stayed there. Liberation can be polite. The page offered a phone number if I wanted a human voice. I did. The branch had added a call center a few years ago, but there was still a local option if you knew where to look. I dialed it. After the automated greeting, I pressed the invisible sequence that once brought people to my desk when I wore a nameplate. A woman answered with a voice that smiled as she spoke. "Good morning, First National. This is Clara." "Morning, Clara. This is Walter Grayson." I just adjusted a transfer online and wanted to make sure the stop takes effect immediately. She asked for identifiers and I gave them from memory in a rhythm I could keep in my sleep. She found the account so quickly I imagined the screen leaping to attention. "Do you wish to discontinue the transfers completely?" Her keyboard made a soft clatter that reminded me of rain on a tin roof. "All right, Mr. Grayson, it is now off. I am sending a confirmation message to your email and your postal address. Is there anything else I can review for you while I have the file open?" "Yes. I would like to verify something about property records linked to this account." She hesitated the way trained people do when their job meets a line. I heard her measure several sentences and discard them. I can confirm what we have on record for you. That will do. She read the deed information that has lived with me longer than half the bones in my body. Name, address, loan number, no co-owners. She said it in that careful tone people use when they are carrying something you care about on a tray. Has anyone in the past year initiated changes to those records or inquiries that suggest changes? Another pause. The clatter returned faster. I am seeing a flagged application from Winter. It did not proceed. It appears to have been connected to a refinance inquiry. Your name was attached, but the signature on the form is not the one we have on file. The title search returned solely to you. The system notes say the documents did not meet verification standards. I closed my eyes not because I was surprised, but because relief can be heavy. The beep from the transfer confirmation kept ringing in a corner of my mind like a small bell you refuse to ignore. Did the applicant identify himself? The notes indicate a person presented as family. The name listed was Ryan Keller. Thank you for reading that carefully, Clara. I appreciate your caution. Please add a note to my file that any changes require in-person verification by me only. No exceptions. I can do that. Done. One more thing. If anyone attempts contact about that property without me present, please record the attempt, the time, and where it came from. She was quiet for a second, then said she understood. Her tone shifted into something I recognized. It was the voice of someone who has seen tactics and does not like them. Is there anything else I can help you with today? You already have. You confirmed my home remains my own and that signatures still matter. After I hung up, the spreadsheet of years seemed to settle on the desk. Nothing moved, but my shoulders loosened. Numbers do not lie. People do. The trick is getting the numbers to stand where everyone can see them. I checked my email and saw the confirmation had arrived with a series of digits that would stand up in any room. I saved the message twice and printed it to the little machine the clerk had lent me. The paper came out warm. I placed it on the left side of the folder and wrote the time on the top corner. Dates are the skeleton of truth. Next, I called the insurance office. The agent knew my name and made a joke about how long I had been with them. I laughed politely and directed the conversation where it needed to go. Remove 2 vehicles associated with my policy. Do it today. The agent went through the process with professional cheer. He read a line from the disclosure. I told him I understood. When he said the change was complete, the system produced the same small beep through my laptop speakers because their web portal mirrored the phone action. That cheerful tone had begun to sound like a new weather pattern. He offered to discuss a renter's endorsement for those vehicles. I said not necessary. He thanked me for my loyalty to the company. I thanked him for following the procedure. I did not list more changes. There would be time for quiet undoing later. For now, I wanted the most obvious doors back under my hand. I checked my watch. The morning had walked away without telling me, but I did not mind. Work can be that kind of friend. I wrote today's actions on the clean page of the brown notebook. Discontinued transfer, noted the attempted refinance and flagged it. Adjusted insurance to reflect reality. The words felt tidy. I added a narrow line under the list and copied the confirmation numbers. Evidence does not drive itself. You must put gas in it and keep the tires checked. I shut the cover and lay my palm over the leather as if to keep the contents from lifting. I needed air. The rain had stopped, leaving the lot glossed as if it had been newly paved. Across the way, the pharmacy door opened and a man emerged with a bag and a face that looked like he had been given 2 options and chose the one that would make his wife happy. I nodded to him, and he nodded back, 2 strangers agreeing silently that small tasks keep a person from thinking too much at once. On my way back to room 12, I thought of Emily at the kitchen table when she was 10, sorting coupons into piles because she liked systems. She used to ask what made a number honest. I would tell her it was the same thing that makes a person honest. Does it match what it says it is? Somewhere along the way, that simple test had been replaced by a louder question. Does it get me what I want? Teaching your child. The difference between those questions is a job that never ends. Sometimes you teach by paying, sometimes you teach by stopping. Back in the room, I placed the folder in the drawer and locked it with the small key most guests ignore. I sat and typed a summary of the morning into the timeline file. The keys made their dry little rhythm until the page matched my recollection point for point. The last line I wrote read, "There is no anger in these actions, only arithmetic." When I stopped typing, the room changed sound. The wall clock took over with its even metronome. For the first time, the tick did not feel like something chasing me. It felt like a signal that the hour and I had finally agreed. I leaned back and let that agreement spread through my shoulders. The fair thing about time is that it does not argue. It simply waits while you decide whether to spend it or let someone else withdraw it. The phone rang with a local number. I answered because I recognized the pattern of digits. It was Clara again. "Mr. Grayson, I wanted to add one thing. The winter inquiry you asked about prompted us to add an internal note requesting that any future contact involving that address be relayed to you directly. I did not want you to find out from anyone else. Also, for your knowledge, the individual who came in attempted to present a scanned copy of your signature. Our system compares vectors. The lines did not match. Thank you for telling me that. It seemed important. It is." When the call ended, I sat still for a full minute. A scanned signature is not just a forgery. It is a picture of a lie someone believes he can get away with because he mistook ink for identity. I thought of Ryan holding that paper with my name in a font that tried to pass for human, and I felt something like sorrow for a person who thinks a household can be stolen with a printer. The rain returned lightly as if the sky had reconsidered and decided to finish what it started. I went to the window and watched the drops find their lines down the glass. The neon sign blinked a patient orange on and off and on again. This time, the buzz did not feel like a threat. It felt like a reminder. Lights tell their truth by staying or by going. They do not explain themselves. The rest of us should be so disciplined. I made one more call before lunch. It was to the small utility office where a woman named Darlene had sat behind the same counter longer than most marriages last. She recognized my voice and asked after my health. I told her I was fine and requested that every item tied to my name move to paper invoices payable only by me. No automatic anything. She read the instructions back and tapped her keyboard with a rhythm that would have made Laura smile. When she finished, she said she would print me a packet that I could pick up this afternoon. I thanked her and pictured the envelope waiting at the little glass window with my name written neatly in ink. I closed the laptop. The keys went still. The tick of the wall clock stepped into the silence like a shoe tapping a floor to test the strength of it. I stood and rolled my shoulders and felt a space open where something heavy had been resting. Paperwork does not fix a family. It does not heal grief. It does not teach a son-in-law why men draw lines. But it builds a fence the right height around a life that was starting to look like a public park. Before I left for the utility office, I slid the brown notebook into my jacket and tucked the folder under my arm. The leather warmed to my skin. I walked down the corridor past the ice machine and out into the softened light. Each step sounded like a punctuation mark I had earned the right to place. Some people pray, some people run. That morning I checked boxes that belonged to me. Justice, it turns out, is sometimes nothing more than writing the correct answer where a blank space has been waiting. In a small town, truth travels faster than mail. I learned that before noon standing under the diner's tin awning while a slow drizzle let go of the morning. The bell over the door chimed as I stepped in. Heat and bacon and the brightness of a griddle slapped the damp off my shoulders. Ruth, who has poured more coffee than I have signed forms, slid a mug onto the counter before I sat. She did not ask how I was. She set the cup in front of me and said, "Fresh pot," as if the words meant I am here if you need to be known. Steam lifted from the dark surface and fogged a small circle on the chrome napkin holder. My face appeared and wavered in it, then cleared and returned. Truth does that when you hold still long enough. It rises through heat and makes itself visible whether you want it to or not. I watched the circle for a breath and then took a sip. My hands were steady on the cup. The hurt had shifted again, farther back like thunder walking off into other hills. The bell rang twice more in quick succession. Boots on old tile. Frank Holloway eased onto the stool beside me, hat in his hands, banker posture softened by Saturday. He stared at the mug Ruth placed near his elbow and turned it a quarter inch, then another, as if aligning the handle with an internal compass. "You know what he wrote under ownership?" he asked, eyes on his coffee. I did not pretend confusion. I can guess. Your full name followed by the kind of mark a man makes when he has watched you sign but never learned what a signature means. He lifted the cup and blew at the steam. 50,000. The application said home improvements. We ran the search. It came back to you clean and whole. The form tried to say otherwise. The lines didn't match. I shut it down. The sound in the diner shifted around us. A spatula hit a grill. A baby's spoon rattled against a plate. Somewhere behind the counter, the radio cracked with a weather update and went fuzzy again. I let Frank's words stand in the warm noise until they arranged themselves into the arrangement I already knew. My eyes went to the window where the gray of the day pressed itself flat against the glass, and then to the small mirror of the napkin holder where my face had come back into focus. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, sipped, and set the cup down with a careful clink. He had an answer for every question that didn't need asking. Spoke like a man doing you a favor. When I explained how verification works, he used a phrase I haven't liked since the first time I heard it. He said he was family. I told him family is not a credential. Ruth leaned her forearms on the counter and looked at us with one eyebrow raised. "Do I need to bring you to a pot or a witness?" "Just the pot," Frank said. "Witness is already here." Around us, the town shifted into our conversation the way a stream slides around rocks. 2 men at a booth said my name and then went quieter. A woman from church lifted her phone, took a look at whatever message had found her, and frowned toward the window where the rain had returned. I could feel the story moving from table to table without anyone pushing it. You do not always need to tell your own story. Sometimes the town tells it for you, and telling it becomes its way of making itself right. Frank pulled a folded slip from his wallet. "I can't hand you the document, but I wrote the date. If someone asks you about timing, you won't need to guess." I took the paper and slid it under my palm. It was the weight of a single sentence. That day I said recognizing winter by the number alone. He brought dinner and talked about gutters. Frank's mouth tightened. Then he was running 2 games at once. That tracks. He turned a little so Ruth could refresh his cup, and when he turned back his eyes were soft. "You're steady, Walter. People notice that. They'll also notice who stands steady beside you now." Ruth drew a quick circle with the pot topping my mug and said without looking up, "Some folks don't know the difference between generosity and an open till." The bell chimed again. A man named Tom from the hardware store came in, rain on his shoulders. He saw me and nodded. "You need anything he said you come by? We got that lock line in again. The good kind." Conversation piled up behind him like a gentle wave, and then broke into smaller talk. I finished my coffee. The steam had cooled and no longer blurred the small mirror. My face stared back, unadorned by anything except the angle of a man who has decided how he'll spend his afternoon. I paid at the register with cash. Ruth pressed my hand and slipped a receipt into my fingers that did not need to be kept but would be kept anyway because paper has started to feel like company. The bell sang us out. On the sidewalk, the rain had thinned to mist. The town wore that washed look it gets between errands. I could have walked back to the motel. Instead, I turned toward the square. As I passed the hardware store, Tom stuck his head out and called after me. "You hear about Keller at the dealership?" He did not wait for an answer. People talk. I'm just saying there's a line between a pitch and a promise, and he's been dancing on it. He shook his head and drew back inside. The bell on his door clacked against wood. At the corner by the post office, Mrs. Beale from the church mailing committee stopped me with a hand flutter that always reminds me of a bird landing where it has no right. "I was just thinking about Laura's bake sales," she said out of nowhere, which is how some people say I've heard something. She could get a whole town to bring pies without ever raising her voice. "I miss that," I said. "We all do." She leaned in. "Folks are saying things, some true, some loud. You need help, you ask. People remember what you did when others needed it. There was nothing to do but accept the offer without promising anything in particular." She walked on. 2 teenagers in hoodies slid by on skateboards, faces sober because the sidewalks demanded respect when wet. They did not know me, but they saw me. Small towns are like that. We keep count without counting. The county building rose from the end of the block with all the patience of brick. I climbed the shallow steps and reached for the door. The instant my hand touched the handle, the echo of the diner followed me in the form of the little bell's memory. The lobby smelled faintly of floor polish and a day's worth of umbrellas. A bulletin board carried flyers for lost pets and euchre nights and a blood drive. I walked past them to the clerk's window. Margaret Doyle looked up from a stack of forms and smiled in the weary way of someone who has seen everyone convince themselves they are the exception to the rules. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "what can I do for you?" "I'd like certified copies of my deed," I said, "and the most recent property record. I'd also like to verify that no changes have been recorded without my signature." She slid a form across the counter. "Boxes to check. One fee covers both. There is comfort in paper that requires only truth." I filled the lines with the neat print my schoolteachers hated because it was not cursive, and I had never learned to make cursive look like anything except a vine. Margaret took the sheet, read it as if reading were a kind of prayer, and disappeared into the back. While I waited, a couple came in arguing and fell silent when they saw me. Past them, a young man in a wet hoodie studied a pamphlet about business licenses, as if it might teach him adulthood in an afternoon. On a bench near the window, a tired woman rocked a baby with a motion so practiced it might have been breath. Margaret returned with papers stacked, stamped, and clipped. She slid them under the glass like a dealer passing a clean hand. "Everything still shows you," she said. "Sole owner, no liens. If anyone tries anything, that bell rings back here." She tapped the desk bell with a knuckle, and its small sound bounced off the plaster like the chime over the diner door. Time turned gently on itself for a second, and then the present resumed. "May I ask," she added, lowering her voice, "if there's a reason I should watch the files more closely?" "Reason enough," I said. She nodded as if she had been given a password. "I'll keep my eyes where they ought to be." When I stepped back into the hallway, the building's old clock sounded the quarter hour with a tone too polite to be a warning. I folded the copies into my folder and tucked them under my arm like a book a man wants to reread. The rain had stopped. The square smelled like wet brick. The world had been washed and set back on the shelf. On the path through the park, I ran into Mike from the auto shop. He wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white. He said he had heard things he did not like the sound of, and that if anyone came by asking questions about me, he would answer with facts. "You're steady," he said, the word making another circle in the day. "People see that." Then he added in a lower tone, "They also see who isn't." By the time I reached the corner near the pharmacy, my phone had filled with messages I did not have to send. Pastor Lewis asked whether I needed a ride to Wednesday supper. A neighbor wrote that a man had stopped by my place with questions and had not liked her refusal to answer. Someone from the volunteer fire department texted a single sentence that read, "You're not alone." The feeling that arrived with those words was not relief. It was structured. I had always been the one building things. It turns out a town can raise scaffolding around a man when he is busy carrying lumber. I went back to the motel, slowly letting the afternoon pass through me instead of around me. The square echoed at my back with the kind of talk that is not rumor. It is a consensus. When I reached room 12, I laid the deed copies on the desk and looked at the stamp again. The ink had pressed a circle so clean it looked like it could lift off the page. I pictured Ruth's coffee steam, my face appearing and disappearing in the shine, and I understood what this day had done. It had brought the shape of my story into the air and let other people name it. I did not need to argue with anyone. I needed only to keep walking where the facts were already going. The clock in the room ticked into the next minute, unbothered by my thinking. I wrote a short line in the brown notebook. Today the town spoke first. I closed the cover and listened to the pines worrying at the last drops from their branches. Justice had begun to travel. Not because I shouted, because I stopped explaining. If they thought silence meant surrender, they had never met a man with paperwork. I left room 12 with the brown notebook under my arm and the folder snug against my ribs. The morning held that rinsed light that comes after rain, the kind that makes brick look older and cleaner at once. My shoes clicked a slow measure over the walkway and then quickened at the sight of the county building patient as a barn and twice as honest. I climbed the shallow steps and let the door swing shut behind me. Floor polish and wet umbrellas greeted me like practical saints. Margaret Doyle looked up from a stack of forms and did that small lift of the chin that says she has seen everything and is still polite about it. I set the folder on the counter and opened it to the first copy. She slid a request sheet across the glass. I filled lines with a steady hand. Name, address, certified copies, recent record. She watched as if my pen were a small boat entering a known harbor. When she finished reading, she tapped a box I had checked. "Sir, do you realize this is your daughter's address?" "No, ma'am. It is my wife's legacy." She held my gaze a moment and nodded. Then the window hummed as she disappeared to the back with my sheet. I watched a janitor roll a yellow bucket toward the elevator and think carefully about nothing. On the bulletin board, a flyer about a pancake breakfast lifted one corner like it wanted to fly but knew better. Margaret returned with a manila stack and a red seal in her other hand. Each page came down to the counter with a calm whisper. She reached for the stamp, turned it until the county crest faced true north, and pressed. The thump lived in the paper and in my chest at the same time. Bloodless justice. She stamped the next sheet and the next, creating a sequence of quiet certainties. I did not know you could hear order. That morning I did. These are certified. She slid a receipt across. If anyone attempts a change, the system pings us. We call you. She held up a small brass bell on the desk and let it ring once. The sound bounced off the plaster like a coin on a table. We keep our eyes where they ought to be. Thank you. Please note that any contact about this property requires me to be in the room. No exceptions. Already typed and saved. She leaned closer and lowered her voice without moving her lips much. Some people arrive with smiles and empty folders. You arrived with documents. That makes my work simple. I tucked the copies into the folder, and the thump of the seal still echoed as I pushed through the door into the bright. The rain had started again, thin and busy. I walked the block to the police station with the kind of pace that makes a day submit. Inside, the air smelled like old coffee and a floor that had been mopped 1,000 times. A young officer at the desk smiled with his eyes and told me to wait. Detective Carl Jensen stepped out from a side door with a hand extended and the face of a man who had traded sleep for patience too many years to count. Walter. He motioned me into his office, a room with a map on the wall and a plant that had decided to try living here. He shut the door with a soft click. I heard some rumblings. You want to get ahead of any surprises? I set the brown notebook and the folder on his desk and told the story as a series of facts placed end to end. The winter inquiry with the timid ex where rights pretend to live. The transfers are undone. The certified copies were stacked like small, obedient bricks. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and looked at the ceiling as if it held the next step. I can check what I can check, he said. If you want to file anything or start a paper trail, you are already speaking my language. I will caution you about the difference between wrong and illegal. A lot of men try to live in that alley. I understand the alley, I said. I am not walking there. I am building a sidewalk where anyone can see. He smiled a small, practical smile and typed my notes into his system. He asked for dates and times. I had them. He asked for copies of what I could provide. I had those too. He clicked a final key and then folded his hands in front of him. There is one other matter. He was careful with the words. Folks at Glacier Peaks have been talking for months. We never use hearsay. We do use patterns. Your son-in-law is a regular at the poker tables. That by itself is not a crime. Debts are not crimes either. But the individuals who have called us asking about him use voices I recognize. The number we keep hearing is about 20,000 and climbing. I let my breath out through my nose. No anger, no surprise, only arithmetic. I nodded and felt the red seal thump in my memory again. That number matters, I said. It matters because pressure makes men sloppy, Jensen said. Sloppy men try doors they should not try. People who yell in driveways are one kind of trouble. People who owe the wrong people are another. If you feel followed or threatened, you call. If he shows up where he should not be, you call. If your neighbor hears shouting and sees him at your porch, you call. We will log it. Paper protects people. He printed a simple incident number and slid it toward me. I set the corner under my finger to steady it. I am not interested in fights, I said. I am interested in lines. He nodded. Lines keep the peace. He tapped the map behind him as if lines were drawn on it for plans that had nothing to do with streets. Keep doing what you are doing. Document. Move through official offices. If he pushes, we add weight. When I stepped back out to the desk, the young officer handed me a brochure about filing a formal complaint if needed. It was thin and ugly and full of truth. As I pushed through the door, the rain met me with that quick sound it makes when tires sweep water off the road. I stood a moment under the overhang and watched a patrol car move out, lights quiet, engine determined. The day held firm. The next stop was a law office on the square where an old colleague of mine does clean work with messy situations. His receptionist remembered my name from the bank and told me he could see me after lunch. I did not mind waiting. I walked to the corner store and bought a cheap umbrella and a sandwich wrapped in paper that made a soft crinkle like old money. I took both to the courthouse lawn and ate under the statue of a soldier who looked more tired than brave. The rain eased. Squirrels practiced being nervous and then forgot about it. At 1, I sat across from my old colleague in a room that smelled like books and ink. He had the eyes of a man who has learned that the law is not a sword or a shield, but a frame. I placed the certified copies before him and arranged them like fallen dominoes made right again. He read them with the respect of someone who knows paper is not decoration. "Here is what we will do," he said. "We prepare a notice to quit in clear language and have the sheriff serve it. We attach your certified copies so the first thing anyone reads is the seal. We include a list of conditions broken, not an argument, evidence. Then we prepare the next steps should they refuse. We do not call it by names you will later find tiring. We call it a lawful request followed by a lawful remedy. You are not angry. You are tidy. Tidy is all I have time for," I said. He smiled. "It is enough." He picked up a pen and began to draft. Words marched across the page like small soldiers who understood their drill. He read each line out loud so both our heads could hear the same thing. When he finished, he handed me the sheet. I read slowly, stopped at a phrase, and changed 2 words to ones that carried less heat and more weight. He nodded and replaced them. "We will file these now." He stood. "The clerk will stamp them. The sheriff will serve within 48 hours. You will not be the one delivering news. The county will." We walked down the hall to a window I had not stood at in years. The clerk on duty had hair pinned up and eyes that took in a room all at once. She looked at the form and at the copies and at me. Then she reached for the red seal. The stamp met the paper with that same clean thump. It sounded like a door closing carefully. Another thump. Another. The ink shone a moment and then dried into itself. She slid the packet back with a receipt that read, "Paid," and folded. I tucked everything into my folder until the edges were square. On my way out, the stairwell window was fogged by the wet breath of a dozen umbrellas. I drew a small line through the middle of the fog with the back of my hand and looked at the square. A bus rolled past. A boy carried a trumpet case that looked too heavy and too full of promise. The town wore its honesty like an old jacket. It had kept my secrets. Now it would keep my facts. The parking lot smelled like wet pavement and warm engines. I got into the truck and set the folder on the passenger seat. The engine started with that dependable shake that feels like a friend clearing his throat. As I pulled onto the street, the wipers found their rhythm. Each drag of the blade felt like a line across a page. The radio offered static and then a song from a year that used to feel newer. I turned it down until it was only a suggestion in the background. At a light, my phone buzzed. A number I recognized from a collector left a message for Ryan. He had given them my address again. I did not feel fear or anger. I felt the shape of the day. Back at the station, I would add it to the report. I would not call anyone names. I would not make speeches. I would let the entries pile up until the weight took care of the rest. The rain increased and the truck's tires whispered through it. My hands were steady on the wheel. The red seal thump lived in my ear like a drum at a quiet parade. Some men build their lives out of noise and then call that power. I have learned that the sound a stamp makes when it meets paper can be louder than any voice raised in a room. Justice did not require shouting. It required forms in the right boxes, signatures that matched the person holding the pen, and a willingness to wait while the ink dries. I drove back toward the motel with the wipers doing their work, and the day arranged the way a patient man arranges his tools. They mistook compassion for weakness one last time. The first ring came just after noon, bright and insistent, as if the motel phone had been coached to sound like urgency. I let it run and counted the spaces between sounds. The air vent breathed a steady note. The neon outside hummed and faded and hummed again. When the ringing stopped, quiet filled the room like a held breath. The second ring arrived minutes later, then a third, each one a hand tapping at the door of a man who had finally learned to lock it. I picked up on the fourth. Emily's voice rushed in before the line had time to settle. "Dad, please, you have to listen." I closed my eyes and let my breath steady. She filled the space with words about doctors and appointments and how stress is not good for a pregnancy. She said the word baby as if it were a key that fits every lock. "Dad, please, it is for the baby." "Then let the doctor call me, not you." Silence scratched the wires. She tried again with a new angle dressed with concern. "You do not need to talk to anyone. Just help now and we can fix the rest later. The word later has carried more trouble into houses than any other I know. I gave her the number she could have the office use. I told her I would speak with a biller or an administrator and arrange to cover what was needed if there was a real emergency. I told her I would wait for the call. She said she would make it happen. The line went unusually still at the end, like a hallway after footsteps fade. I set the phone down and watched its small screen blacken into a mirror. My face looked older by a year and calmer by a decade. In the reflection, I could see the brown notebook on the desk. I opened it and wrote a single line. If it is real, the truth will walk in through the front door. The phone began again almost immediately. A different number, a different tone. Ryan's voice wore a friendliness that made my teeth feel cold. He congratulated me on the news and said we should talk about what a good grandfather does. He offered to come pick me up. His words tried to carry me back over a threshold I had already crossed. No, I said. Have the office call. He shifted to a kind of laugh that men use when they think you have missed a very simple idea. He said I was making this harder than it needed to be. He said grown men handle their business without dragging strangers into it. He said the word family and stretched it until it lost its shape. I repeated myself. Then I ended the call. The room returned to its sounds. Air vent. Neon hum. My own breath finding the even pace of someone walking a line he drew himself. I poured water from the sink into the mug and drank it standing. The taste was metallic and honest. I took the brown notebook back to the breakfast room and sat at the table near the window so the light could help me see what I already knew. I wrote down Emily's words exactly, then mine, then the time. I left space for the call I had asked for. When I returned to the room, a message waited from a number I did not recognize. A woman's voice, careful and professional, explained that she was returning a call on behalf of the Women's Health Clinic and that no protected information could be discussed without authorization. She was not calling to share details. She was calling because a man named Walter had left a message asking for a way to pay for emergency services if needed. She added that no appointment existed under the name and date I had mentioned. If an appointment were scheduled, the office would require a release before any conversation about payment or anything else. Her words were measured and precise. They did not accuse. They did not reveal. They carried one useful truth on a tray of policy. No appointment on the calendar for the time Emily had described. I thanked the empty room for the courtesy of accuracy and wrote another clean line in the notebook. No record of visit. The office requires authorization. Prepared to pay only upon verification. I sat with the page open and felt a slow ache that had nothing to do with anger. I wanted to remember my daughter without the grit of this day in my teeth. I wanted to hold the version of her who had pressed dandelions into my palm and told me a flower is just a weed that got lucky. I let the ache sit where it needed to. Then I closed the cover and let the notebook be the one to carry the weight. The phone rang again. Emily. This time her voice had an edge of rehearsed panic. She said the clinic would not call me because I was not on the forms. I told her I understood patient privacy. I told her to sign a release so the office could speak to whoever was paying. She said there was no time for paperwork. I said there is always time for paperwork if a life is really at stake. The line went quiet in a way that said my words had landed where she did not want to stand. Dad, you are playing with my child's safety. Money should not be this complicated. The sentence scraped the ceiling of the room and fell back without sticking. My breath steadied. The steadying felt like a tide turning and leaving a new shape in the sand. I spoke so she could hear the shape. Emily, I will help in any genuine emergency. If there is a doctor who needs to speak to me, I will answer. If not, then no. She tried the older keys. She said if Laura were alive, she would not let me be this cold. I put a hand on Laura's sweater and remembered what warmth actually is. It is not giving until you are erased. It is not obeying until your name does not belong to you. I told Emily her mother would have insisted on the truth and a signature before anyone wrote a check. The phone rattled with her breath. She said I was leaving her with no options. I did not list the options she had that did not involve me. I told her I would be by the phone for the next 2 hours. I told her after that I had errands and would return by evening. She said nothing. The call ended with that small click that feels like a door closing with one finger. The motel held me while I walked the length of the room twice. Outside, a quick shower threaded through the pines and stitched itself into the day. Then the sky cleared as if it had changed its mind. I sat again and waited, not like a supplicant, but like a man who understands that patience is the only tool worth using before noon. The phone did not ring. The air vent hummed. The neon sign found its slow pulse. A bird tried a few notes and stopped. I gave it the rest of the hour. Then I called the clinic back and left a single sentence in the general mailbox. If an emergency arises for a patient named Emily Keller and you need a guarantor, please call Walter Grayson at this number. I will authorize payment upon speaking with a staff member. Thank you. No one picked up. No one needed to. The afternoon stretched. I took the folder and walked to the office to retrieve the envelope the clerk had held for me. She smiled without asking questions and slid it across the counter. I tucked it under my arm and went out into the kind of light that makes every surface look newly washed. The street had that day-after-rain smell, warm and clean at once. I crossed to the corner store and bought a small bag of almonds and a bottle of water. Food you can carry for a long time. At the curb, the phone rang again. The same number that had not left an appointment. I answered. The same careful voice said she was returning my message to acknowledge receipt. She repeated that the office could not discuss patient details and added that the scheduling system showed no emergency visits for the day under the name given. If the patient called with an emergency, the staff would dial the emergency number and proceed according to protocol. Her voice was soft steel. I thanked her for her time and her clarity. She thanked me for mine. I stood on the sidewalk with a bottle of water in my hand and watched a school bus roll by and leave a long sigh in its wake. I felt something shift inside me that was not disappointment. It was the relief of knowing a line has been drawn in ink and will not run when it meets water. I walked back to room 12 with the almonds unopened and set them on the desk beside the brown notebook. I wrote a final note under the day's entries. Tested by story, answered with structure. The next ring came from Ryan and arrived like a cymbal in a quiet orchestra. He did not say hello. He went straight to accusation, his words fast and bright. He said I had humiliated his family by involving strangers. He said I had made things dangerous. He said I owed them peace, and I was buying conflict. I waited until the flood had run past my ankles. Then I stepped onto a dry sentence and stood on it. No doctor called me, no appointment existed, no release was signed. I will help when there is a truth to stand on, not before. He tried a new tactic. He softened. He apologized for raising his voice in the past and for being heavy-handed. He asked for another chance. He said he would make it all right if I came home and we started over. The word home wore the outfit of a place I no longer recognized. I told him I was where I needed to be. He told me I was throwing away the only family I had. I said a rope is not a family just because it is tied around your wrists. The click that ended that call sounded a little sharper. The room brightened. The afternoon began its slow slide toward evening that hour when the world changes clothes without asking permission. I picked up Laura's sweater and shook it out and laid it over the back of the chair. The air smelled clean and new and a little like the rain had left a window open somewhere. A car rolled into the lot and idled a minute, then left. I watched it without interest. Across the way, the pharmacy turned off half its lights and the sign over the diner 2 blocks down found its glow. I put away the notebook and set the folder square on the desk. I placed the unopened almonds in the drawer and smiled at the idea that I could be full of clarity alone. When the phone rang again at dusk, it was Emily. Her voice had lost the acting and found a tired honesty. She said she was sorry for the way the day had gone. She said she did not know what else to do. She said she felt trapped. I told her I heard that, and that feeling trapped often makes people say things that are not true. I told her tomorrow would still come and leave and come again. I told her I would answer if a professional called me and that I would not answer any more stories tonight. Dad, I am scared. I am too, I said. I am just not confused. She breathed once into the line. Then she whispered that she loved me and hung up. I listened to the dial tone and set the phone down gently, as if it needed rest. I stood and turned off the lamp. The room folded itself into a softer color. Outside, the first drops of a new shower ticked on the railing. Somewhere, a car door shut, and a laugh traveled down the corridor and broke apart into ordinary footsteps. I walked to the window and touched the glass, cool and smooth. The phone sat on the table, dark and quiet. I pressed the red button to silence any last calls. The tiny click sounded final in the kindest way. Light drained from the sky. Rain wrote a thin script along the curb. I stepped outside into the dusk and let the wet air find my face. Tires whispered on the road and the town exhaled. Love remained where it belonged. So did the truth. He called me senile in front of strangers. I called him about his debts. The square was bright as a polished coin, and the courthouse glass threw sunlight across the steps like a white blade. Traffic shouldered past, horns pecked at the air. Shoes clicked against stone, and somewhere a bus let out that long, tired sigh it saves for every stop. I was walking toward the clerk's window with my folder under my arm when Ryan stepped off the curb and planted himself 3 feet from me, as if the sidewalk belonged to him by announcement. He raised his voice until pigeons lifted from the statue. He said the old man had lost his mind. He said someone should check my wallet before I gave the town away. He turned to the people near the fountain and told them I had thrown my family into the street because I wanted control back. People glanced up from their screens and then lifted them higher. Phones rose like a small forest pointed at daylight. I stopped where the light hit my shoes. His sweat shone on his temple in a clean stripe. He said, "You crazy old man." I said, "Crazy men do not keep receipts." A few faces changed, not with noise, with that small shift people make when a picture sharpens. A bike messenger rolled closer and put one foot on the ground. A woman with a stroller backed out of the way and stayed anyway. Ryan tried again. He called me selfish and cold. He pointed at my folder and said I had been writing stories about him to make myself feel important. I turned so my voice could carry without strain. 18 to 20,000 at the poker tables over at Glacier Peaks. Someone who is not me now knows your number. You tried to walk paper into a bank and had my name in a scanned picture. The bank knows the lines do not match. I know the lines do not match. Anyone here who wants to learn the difference between a signature and a copy can visit the clerk with me. No one moved. No one needed to. The clerk's window waited behind the glass with the stamp that had thumped all morning, and that was enough. Ryan laughed, but it had a little tear in it. He told the crowd I was making up figures to hide a breakdown. He turned to a businessman at the curb and asked whether he wanted to buy a truck from a man whose father-in-law lied like that. The businessman stared at his phone as if it were reading his own mind back to him. I took one small step closer so I could lower my voice and still be heard. Debt speaks in numbers. Ownership speaks in names. I have both. You have neither where my place is concerned. People do not need my anger. They need what the paper says. That is all. A boy in a baseball cap held his phone higher. He did not smile. A couple in suits stopped mid-stride and stood at the edge of the shade. A dog sat down and watched with the kind of open face animals have when humans confuse them. The air carried a bus brake chatter and then went still. Ryan moved his hands the way men do when they think size will make truth. He told me to take it back or he would make me. The officer at the corner put a palm up without thinking, and Ryan shut his mouth like a man who had just remembered he left a flame on at home. He tried a new angle. He looked past me at the crowd and said the town should be ashamed for watching an old man be cruel. He said the family did not hang its laundry on the courthouse rail. Someone near the fountain said no one hung anything. Someone near the bench by the map said the sun is not a rail. Then the quiet came down like a curtain. It had weight. Phones stayed up. The silence of realization stood in the heat with all of us. I let my breath steady and felt my heart hit a calm beat. I said I had brought my papers to the places where papers have lived longer than all of us. I said the stamp had met the page. I said nothing about feelings. I said the numbers would remain when we stopped speaking. He tried to interrupt. I held up one finger and let it hang in the air like a hinge. My daughter is not an account. She is a person I love. Love does not require me to lie for anyone who has learned to live on other people's balances. This is daytime. Let it do its work. Behind us, the courthouse glass flared and went white and then blue again as clouds moved across the sun. In that flare, I saw the shape of my face steady and unremarkable, and Ryan's face restless and lit from a harsh angle. The officer at the corner shifted his weight. Someone coughed. Somewhere on the square, a door opened and released the rich smell of frying onions that belongs to lunch and hope. Ryan pointed at my chest and started a sentence that stalled on the second word. He could not find the rest. That is what happens when the facts show up in shoes and stand where a story wanted to sit. A man I recognized from the auto dealership pushed through the small ring of bystanders and reached for Ryan's elbow. His mouth had that flat kindness you see on men who deliver news every day and hate it every time. He asked whether Ryan had a minute. Ryan shrugged him off and told him I was slandering him. The man said we would talk inside and tipped his head toward the showroom down the block. He did not wait for agreement. He just walked away with a face that had already decided where the afternoon would go next. People lowered their phones the way you lower a flag. A few looked at me and then away as if they had been caught seeing something they had not wanted to suspect. I nodded to the officer. He nodded back. I turned and walked into the building. The clerk met me at the window with the small bell between us and asked whether I needed anything else. No, I said. Daylight has done a fair amount already. Outside again, the tone of the square shifted. Not calmer, lighter. The way a room feels after a heavy thing is lifted and carried out. I took 2 steps toward the corner and felt my phone buzz. 1 buzz. 2. Then a string that made the device feel like a small animal trying to get free. I did not look. The dealership's glass doors opened across the street. Ryan came out alone, shoulders high and forward and wrong. He did not see me. He moved as if the ground tried to push him backward, and he was arguing with it. Then he disappeared around the far corner where a bus hissed and a man flicked a cigarette into a puddle. I sat on the courthouse steps with my folder resting against my thigh. A woman came up and said she had seen enough men talk big and asked whether I had a ride home. I told her I was fine. She touched my shoulder lightly and left. A teenage girl hovered like a bee cheeks pink and then blurted that her mother said I was brave. I told her bravery is mostly preparation with decent timing. She grinned and ran back to the friend who had filmed it and was already watching it again on her screen. The notifications in my pocket settled to a buzz every few minutes. By the time I reached the corner, they had become a slow, steady drum. I answered none. The day had taken over. It did not need me to hold its hand. I walked back to the motel by the quiet route behind the library and past the park where a few kids chased a ball that squirted like a fish. A man mowed a narrow strip of grass with deliberate care. The odor of cut green roses rose and fell. The world refused to be only one thing. In room 12, the light had moved across the bed to the far wall. I set the folder on the desk and washed my hands at the sink. When I looked up, the mirror gave me a face that looked like rest wearing attention. I dried my hands on a thin towel and finally checked the messages. The first ones were from numbers I did not know. Someone had posted the video. A neighbor had shared it with a caption that said, "You should see this before you judge anything." Comments sprouted like little flags. Most were short. A few were sharp and precise. One message came from a reporter at the small station outside town asking if I wanted to say anything on record. I did not. Another came from Pastor Lewis asking if I needed a seat saved at supper. I typed a thank you and a maybe and set the phone down. Then a call came from a contact I recognized. Mike is at the dealership. He did not make me wait. Walter, he said I saw the video. The comments reached my desk before lunch. I talked to him. I did what had to be done. I cannot have someone in my showroom whose word is walking around with a bruise on it. I am sorry for what this cost your daughter. I wish there had been another way. You did what your business requires. It also happens to be the right thing, he said, voice steady. I know you. I know how you are. A man who keeps his papers straight is rare. We will do better by the people who walk in here. I hope your day ends with some peace. After we hung up, the room had the soft sound of an air vent making the exact promise it could keep. I sat and wrote a single sentence in the brown notebook. The town saw with its eyes. It listened with its phones. Then I drew a small box next to the line and filled it with the kind of check mark that feels like a breath. Evening took its time. Sunlight crawled up the wall and rested under the ceiling like a cat. The neon sign outside found its slow pulse. A siren wailed far away and then went quiet before I could decide which direction it had needed. I heated water in the small kettle and made tea with a bag that had been waiting in a drawer as if it knew somebody would need it. Steam rose and kissed my knuckles and fogged the window just enough to turn the world soft at the edges. My phone hummed once more. A short message from Emily. She wrote that she had seen the video and that people were texting her things she did not know how to answer. She wrote that she needed time. Time is what we all need. Time and a little light. I told her I was in room 12 and that I would be here tonight and tomorrow I would be at the diner like I am on Fridays and after that I would be where the paper says I should be. I told her she could find me at any of those places if she wanted to speak in the language of the day. I set the phone face down and walked outside as the last of the sun slid along the railing. Cars idled at the light on the corner. A bike chain clicked. 2 joggers moved as if they were balancing the town on their shoulders and did not want it to fall. A man laughed and clapped his friend on the back. The courthouse glass across town would still be catching the last blaze before it cooled to a pale square. I could almost see it from here. Truth under sunlight. Not loud, just obvious. Later after dark, the phone's hum drifted into sleep. The square quieted. The air vent held its whisper. I dreamed of a clean stamp meeting paper and leaving a circle so honest you could set a cup on it and trust your drink not to tip. When morning arrived, the window shone with that pale early light that makes everything look more itself. A horn on the street gave a soft tap as if to say, "Move along." The phone showed a few more messages that could wait. I stood at the glass and watched the day catch fire slowly. The town was awake. So was I. Sunlight not only shows where people have stumbled, it proves who is still standing. Forgiveness was never the goal. Clarity was. I repeated that in my head as I watched the diner's door breathe people in and out like a slow tide. Late afternoon light slid across chrome and tile, bright enough to show every thumbprint, kind enough to soften faces that had said too much this week. I chose the corner booth with a view of the courthouse windows and the street that stitched the town together. The waitress left water in a napkin without asking. She did not touch my folder. She did not need to. Emily texted that she was on her way. I set my hands flat on the table and felt the faint vibration of footsteps when buses eased to a stop outside. The glass in the window held a pale reflection of a man who had run out of stories and kept his name. I did not rehearse. I let the quiet do the work. It could do better than I ever had. She came in wearing the same blue jacket she used to steal from Laura's closet when autumn first bit. The collar was turned wrong. Her hair was hastily pinned. She looked like a person who had not been sleeping and did not want to say why. She scanned the room once and then walked toward me with a careful purpose that belonged to the girl who used to carry glass ornaments across the living room at Christmas, as if each one contained a small, living breath. She slid into the booth opposite and looked at the folder. I kept my hands where she could see them. The waitress stepped forward and then away as if the table itself had whispered, "Not yet." Emily drew one slow breath. "Dad, everything is loud." "It is only loud because it has finally stopped whispering." She pressed her lips together and nodded once. Her eyes moved to the courthouse windows across the street and then back to the folder. She did not ask about the video or the people or the heat that always follows a day like yesterday. She said she wanted to understand what happened to us. She said she had rehearsed apologies, and none of them felt like anything but small words in a large room. I told her I did not come for an apology. I came to hold the truth still so it could be seen. The water glasses made thin rings on the table. I took a napkin and slid it under each one and felt absurdly grateful to do a small, useful thing. Emily watched my hands the way daughters do when they are trying to remember the first man they ever trusted. The waitress returned and set coffee in front of me and tea in front of her as if she had always known which belonged to whom. Steam rose and turned each of our faces into something softened and temporary. I wrapped my fingers around the cup and let the heat find my knuckles. Emily said she had told people she needed time. She said she had told herself the same thing. Then her voice dropped into the honesty that visits at the end of a long day. She said she had kept a ledger in her head where gratitude could be delayed indefinitely and where help would always continue because that was how it had always been. She said she could see now that a ledger kept that way turns a person into a debtor who resents the one who keeps paying. She lifted the tea bag twice and let it drip. She did not pick it up again. I reached into the folder and lifted a single document. The paper looked colder than the room blue ink holding names that did not shake. The notary seal sat in the margin with a confidence I had come to appreciate. I placed the document between us and turned it so she could read without squinting. She did not touch it. She read every line anyway. Her breath shortened, then evened, her jaw set and released. "So I lose the house," she said at last. "No," I said. "You lose the illusion that it was yours." She stared at the document again, as if the words might change their order if she stared hard enough. The seal did not move. She asked where it would go. I told her the place was already pledged to the Veteran Home Initiative in Laura's name, that work crews would divide the rooms into 3 small apartments with a common kitchen, that the porch would hold wheelchairs and tiny bikes and coffee cups at dawn, and that a flag would hang where the old wind chime used to be. I told her I had arranged it so the building would carry the memory of her mother in a way we could both respect without anyone having to pretend about anything anymore. Emily looked up. The question in her eyes was the child's question that sits behind every adult sentence. Why? Because I want what happens now to be about us, not about expectations wrapped in wood and mortgage paper. Because I will not bargain for affection with a roof. Because I would rather see that place shelter people who know what sacrifice costs than watch it sit like a prize between us. Because love cannot breathe in a room where inheritance is waiting to be named. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She held herself very still the way a person holds a small ache that refuses to be dramatic. She said she had imagined walking her children down that hallway and telling them where she learned to ride a bike. I told her those stories are still hers. Stories do not require property to be true. They require the teller to be honest about how they got made. The waitress came close, reading the air the way things with quiet souls learn to do. She set a plate of toast and left without asking who ordered it. Emily and I both laughed softly because it felt right to put butter on something simple. She picked up a slice and did not eat it, just held it until the heat left it. She asked what I wanted from her. I told her I wanted nothing purchased and nothing borrowed. I told her I wanted the truth carried without delay. I told her I would be at St. Mark's tomorrow, and the microphone during testimony time would be where it always is. I told her I would not say a word unless asked. I told her I would answer a question if a question was asked. I told her I would not defend myself. I told her this was not a trial, it was a turning. Her mouth moved in a way that made her look like Laura for a heartbeat. She said she did not know if she dared to stand and say things her friends would repeat all week. I said courage is usually cowardice that decides to speak. She smiled as if the sentence hurt and helped at the same time. I did not say I was offering her a choice. I let the silence give her the options and let the coffee cool while it did its work. The courthouse clock across the way sounded a half hour in a tone that was polite enough to keep people from resenting time. Outside, a delivery truck sighed and the driver swore in a friendly way as he wrestled a dolly through the rear door of the kitchen. A child laughed and then scolded herself for being too loud. The town arranged its sounds around us without asking our permission to be ordinary. Emily set the toast down and laced her fingers together like a person praying without the words. She said she had believed Ryan when he said structure was only a way to make freedom feel smaller. She said she could see now that structure was the only way to make freedom safe. She said she had been embarrassed by my steadiness because it made her restlessness look like what it was. I did not say anything. I let her hear herself. She asked if there was any path back from this. I told her the path back does not begin where we left. It begins with the truth spoken in the square where you would rather not be seen. It begins with a letter that does not rearrange events to save your pride. It begins with a call to the people you involved when you should not have, and a sentence that contains the word wrong without any lipstick. It begins with counseling, if that is the word you need to say out loud to yourself to describe the work of learning kindness again. It begins with not asking me to pretend that all of this was only a misunderstanding. She nodded as if each sentence had landed like a small weight on a scale and the needle had stopped moving. She said Ryan had been fired. She said he had told her the town had conspired against him. She said she had heard herself repeat that lie and had felt something sour in her mouth. She said she did not want to taste that again. I slid the folder back toward my side of the table and closed it with my palm. She watched the motion and let out a breath that sounded like something being put down where it belonged. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper and pushed it halfway across the table without touching my hand. I opened it. It was a draft of a letter to the Tribune. It was clumsy and honest and had ink smudges where a sentence had been wiped and rewritten. She asked if I would mark it. I told her I would read it and keep my pen in my pocket and ask one question at the end. Did you leave anything out that would make this easier for you than it should be? She smiled at that and said she would know the answer before I did. We sat for a while without speaking. The coffee went cool. The tea went bitter. The courthouse windows threw bands of light across the table that moved as slowly as the day could manage. Through the glass, a pair of sparrows hopped and argued over a crust in the gutter and then forgot about it and flew away. The waitress brought the check without the usual rhythm, set it between us, and touched my shoulder with 2 fingers, in a way that made it clear she did not need to know anything to wish us well. I paid and left the receipt on the table. Emily tucked the draft letter back into her bag and stood. She leaned in as if to hug me and then stopped because she remembered that sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is give a person their own air. She straightened the collar of her jacket and looked out the window toward the church roof, peeking over the line of shops. Somewhere in the distance, a bell practiced its notes for the hour to come. The sound found the glass and trembled there. She said she would be at St. Mark's in the morning. She said she would say what needed saying. She said she did not know what would happen afterward, which told me she understood more than she had yesterday. I told her I would listen. I told her when it was over I would drive out to the lake and drink a cup of coffee with Laura, and if the wind was right, I would tell Laura that her daughter had chosen a better word than later. Emily touched the back of the chair and pushed it in with a small, polite scrape. She took 3 careful steps and then the 4th, if a decision. She walked past the counter and past the bell over the door and out onto the sidewalk. The bell chimed once thin and bright. I watched her through the window as her footsteps found the rhythm of a person learning how to carry their own story. The door eased shut. Outside, the evening tilted toward gold. She turned left toward the church. I stayed in the booth a full minute after she had gone, listening to the last tremor of the bell melt into the hum of the room. Then I stood and followed the light out, and on the sidewalk a gust lifted the day's dust just enough to remind me that the truth, when it finally stands up, makes its own wind. At sunrise, the coffee didn't taste like revenge, it tasted like peace. The kettle sang a thin note in the quiet, and the cup warmed my hands while the day found its color. The lake lay still enough to hold the first light like a promise. A loon called once and then let silence take its turn. I stood on the small deck of the cabin I had rented for the month and breathed air that had not yet been used by anyone's hurry. Behind me, the screen door ticked in a friendly way against its frame. In front of me, steam rose and curled and disappeared without asking for recognition. I did not think about speeches or crowds. I let the morning do the talking. The coffee tasted clean. My shoulders sat where they belonged. The brown notebook rested on the table with yesterday's page finished and folded under. I did not open it, not yet. A newspaper lay beside the cup. The front page ran a school levee story and a photograph of a marching band that had managed to look both proud and uncertain. The letter I cared about wasn't there. It lived inside center spread, plain as a hand. I turned the pages slowly, the way you do when you want to respect the distance between what was and what is. When I found her name, my chest settled the way a road does after the grader has passed. Emily's letter did not try to rearrange anything. She wrote that I had supported her long past the years when support looks like raising a child, and into years when it starts to look like erasing a man. She wrote that she had believed comfort was owed, and that when comfort was interrupted, she had called it cruelty. She wrote that truth walked into the square yesterday and that she had recognized its jaw. She wrote the word wrong without decoration and did not hide it behind we. She ended with a simple sentence that carried its own weight. I will earn back what I gave away. She signed her name the way her teacher taught her in 4th grade, careful loops, steady tail. I set the paper down and let my eyes rest on the line of water where a soft breeze had begun to gather itself. I wished Laura could read the letter and then decided she already had. Some things get through without ink. I raised the cup, sipped, and felt the warmth move the way a small mercy moves when you have stopped asking for proof. The phone on the table buzzed once and turned quiet again. A text from Mike at the dealership sat there like a folded note. He wrote that Ryan had packed a single bag and left town last night. No forwarding address, no goodbye tour. He did not add a moral. He let the fact be enough. Another message waited from Pastor Lewis. The words were short. Breakfast at 8 if you are passing by. I typed that I would. Then I stood with my back straight and my breath even and watched the sun lift itself clear of the far trees. It reached the rim of my cup and laid a thin gold band there, then asked for nothing in return. By 8, the church kitchen smelled like pancakes and stories told without an audience. Folding chairs scraped the floor in a way that sounded like people making room for themselves. Pastor Lewis poured syrup with the loose wrist of a man who has learned moderation. He handed me a plate and nodded toward the far table where the light through the window made squares on the linoleum. He sat quietly for a minute while I ate. Then he said the gentlest thing. Some peace comes from punishment, some from release. This one feels like both. He watched the steam drift from my second cup and looked satisfied as if I had answered a test he wanted me to pass. He told me the letter had already done a circuit through a dozen hearts and would likely make 24 more before supper. He did not smile in a triumphant way. He smiled like a man who had seen rain and knew what puddles do for thirsty birds. After breakfast, we walked out onto the steps and watched the town pick up its morning. The courthouse had put on its daytime face. Trucks made early deliveries. A boy carried a trombone case and balanced it carefully around the corner. The air held that particular cleanness a place wears when a lie has left. There was work to do. The donation papers had lived in envelopes long enough. At 9, I met with the director of the Veteran Home Initiative near the place that used to be mine and had already started learning new pronouns. She was a precise woman with a kindness that showed up as competence, not sentiment. We spread floor plans on the hood of a city truck and talked about where walls would become doors, where a wide ramp would climb to the porch, and where a shared kitchen would let 3 families learn each other's cooking. A carpenter with a pencil behind his ear listened while he measured. He nodded when I asked that Laura's name be small on the plaque, not large. Names on buildings are better when the building does most of the talking. Halfway through the walkthrough, a compact sedan pulled up and parked crooked. Emily stepped out and stood for a full breath with both hands on the door as if it were a railing on a ship. She wore no makeup and did not fix her hair. She walked over and joined us without asking for a stage. The director introduced herself. Emily said she wanted to help paint nothing complicated, just trim or baseboards or whatever someone would let her do. The director pointed to a schedule taped to a clipboard and asked her to circle 3 mornings. Emily circled 5. She wrote her number as if she meant it. We moved inside. The place had been emptied of the furniture that used to remind us of our hands. The floors smelled faintly of pine cleaner and dust made honest. Sunlight reached along the hallway and found nothing to trip over. I touched the frame in the doorway where we had marked Emily's height with a pencil. The marks were gone under a thin coat of fresh white. I did not feel loss. I felt a kind of relief that the records had been transferred to where they belonged. A veteran in his 30s with a careful gait came in with a woman and 2 small boys who kept their hands in their pockets because their mother had told them to. He introduced himself as Derek. He had served stateside, then overseas, then nowhere at all because his right knee had decided to argue. The apartment at the back would be theirs if inspections went the way inspections should. He spoke in short sentences. His eyes kept finding the windows as if calculating the way the light would move across a day. Emily crouched and showed one of the boys the trick of matching different paint chips to his shoelaces. He grinned like paint could be a toy. On the porch, Pastor Lewis joined us and held the paper with Emily's letter folded to the exact place. He shook her hand. He did not tell her she was brave. He said thank you in the tone a man uses when you have set a heavy box down where he can lift it too. Then he turned to me with the smallest tilt of the head. Some peace comes from punishment, some from release, he said again, as if the sentence wanted practice in sunlight. This one feels like both, I said, and the words fit without needing to be adjusted. By noon, the director had everything she needed from me. The sheriff's office would handle the last of the final papers. The carpenter will start the ramp on Monday. A nurse from the health center stopped by and measured a doorway with a tape that had seen more than one life start over. The house, if it still needed to be called that for a few days, stood with a kind of patient dignity, even while half disassembled. You can tell when wood approves of its next purpose. Emily and I walked down the steps and stood on the sidewalk where the sun had warmed a strip just wide enough for both of us. She said she had mailed copies of her letter to 2 cousins who live far and loud and who would need paper more than rumor. She said she had called 3 people and used the word wrong in a sentence to each. She said she had an appointment with a counselor on Thursday. She did not ask for anything. I did not offer anything I could not sign. We stood and let the day pass us by like a parade we did not need to march in. She glanced at the cabin keys in my hand. Lunch, she said. Another time I said and smiled the way men my age smile when they mean yes, only not this minute. She nodded, adjusted nothing, and headed toward her car. When she pulled away, she waved with her fingers against the glass, small, almost shy. I watched the brake lights flash at the corner and thought about the difference between leaving and launching. The light turned green. She went. Back at the lake, the afternoon slid into a quiet that felt earned. I brewed another cup, not out of need, but out of respect for the way small rituals hold a life up. A kingfisher stitched its sharp line across the cove and vanished into the trees. Far off, someone hammered the first board of a ramp, and the sound reached me like a heartbeat. You can trust from a room away. I sat with the cup and let the heat fold itself into my palms. I thought about what justice had meant to me last week and what it means now. Last week it had been stamps, forms, and numbers that stood up straight. Today it looked like a woman writing her name under a sentence no one forced on her. It looked like a man leaving town because lies don't like daylight. It looked like rooms about to hold families who had learned the price of service without complaint. It felt like the anger in me was finding a chair and then deciding it no longer needed to sit in the room. As the sun drifted lower, the water took on a deeper color that you could mistake for seriousness if you didn't know how to read afternoons. I told Laura in the quiet way I tell her things now that our daughter had chosen something worth carrying. I told her that the porch on our old place would know new stories and that the kitchen would hear new laughter and that none of this felt like losing anything that mattered. The cup cooled. The day did not ask for a summary. Before evening, I walked to the edge of the dock and looked once into the surface where the sky was learning how to touch the water. Then I turned back to the table and lifted the cup to my mouth. The steam rose one more time and faded into the air so gently it did not need to prove anything. I set the cup down and let that be the last word. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.